Oh. So right now we've got this set up at this computer where we have both the chat and the Q&A right here. Okay, if you want to take a look at that. So right now, obviously, there's the questions.
Right. So that's the chat, and this, they'll just show up here.
Yeah.
Okay.
But if there's something that I see that you don't, how would you like me to get that? Should I put it in the chat for you, or should I say something?
You can just say something.
Okay, great. I won't interrupt any flow, but if we're waiting for a question, I see one hasn't been answered.
Good. That would be great. And I guess I'll just, once the anchor's finished and it's question time, I suppose I can just sit here.
Yeah. Okay. We've got a microphone for you there, and then we've also got that mic for people. If you can, when people ask you questions, so that the stream can hear.
That's great. Great. Yeah.
And if for some reason somebody asks a question too quickly, or if somebody, either of you could rephrase the question before. Okay, that'd be great. Just cover all the bases.
Okay.
All right. Let's head up to my control center.
All right. I will look for your signal.
All right.
Just about 50 years now. Yes, in my experience, it has been. I think this building dates from maybe 1905 or something. It did start out in another place, but Good morning. Welcome to Plymouth Sunday Forum. We're very glad that you're here. My name is Jackie Prince, and I'm a member of the Sunday Forum Committee. Our thanks this morning to Slats, who's in our balcony and sitting in for Alex Johnson this morning as our tech expert, and we're very grateful to both of them. If you have questions for today's speaker, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And if you have a technical problem, please use the chat and Slats can help you out. Our presenter this morning is Bianca Monique Dawkins. Excuse me. Bianca has founded the organization ICON, I Can Overcome Negativity. She started the movement as a survivor of domestic violence to empower young girls and children and women to stand in their own being. She also hopes to educate and spread the message that violence is not love, as violent behaviors often start at a young age. She's also used fashion as a way to connect, and through t-shirt sales and buy one, heal one, with t-shirts and Icon Tote, 50% of profits support organizations on the ground fighting the fight to end violence against women. So far, Icon has given $5,000 to support safe houses for victims of violence in Minneapolis through the Lincoln Cornerstone advocacy. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Bianca. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining this morning. I appreciate the opportunity to share more about ICON, which is, as you talked about, is very close to my heart. So I appreciate being able to be here this morning to talk about it. I'll share my screen as we go through the presentation. So again, ICON, it stands for I Can Overcome Negativity. It was really important for me to have a business that really shine light for women and young girls to be able to know that they can overcome a situation that may be traumatizing to them. So before I start my presentation, I always like to recognize tender moments, because when you've experienced some sort of violence, you still have a tender moment that you're still healing. And so it's important for me to recognize that as we talk about different situations throughout my presentation that may be triggering for you. So I just want you to recognize your tender moment if you've had an experience in this, and also just realize that you got this. Before I share my personal journey, I'll just talk about what domestic violence is. So domestic violence is violence that anyone can experience at home, from a partner, it could be a family member, but a lot of the violence takes place at home. And as you see a quote on here, it says, "A house where a woman is not safe is not a home." Domestic violence can come in different forms. It could be a financial, mentally, physically. It doesn't always have to be someone physically harming you. So there's really different layers to what domestic violence can be. Something that's really near and dear to my heart is the racial equity that we provide to people in different spaces. And as you may see, Gabby Pepita was one of the young women that were actually, she was murdered, but her story was national. And as I began to reflect, a lot of young women of color did not have, unfortunately, that same platform. And so as we talk to this, I want you to think about the racial equities that happen within these different systems. And as I send my deepest condolences constantly to Gabby's family, there's still work to be done to provide that racial equity for all women of color. Just a few statistics. 1 in 3 women will experience violence in their lifetime. Last year in Minnesota, nearly 70,000 victims received services from domestic violence agencies. Nearly 1/3 of homeless women in Minnesota are homeless, in least in part because of domestic violence. And this one really stands out to me because, as we know, like homelessness, like we don't have enough housing for women. And so as I always look through the data, I never trust it because there's a lot of women that still haven't reported what they're experiencing. And also at the start of COVID and still now, like the numbers have gone up drastically. Unfortunately, they haven't been able to really keep up with the data of like how many women and men are actually experiencing homelessness due to violence in the home as the numbers have gone up during COVID. So I'll talk a little bit about how ICON got started. And before I share my story, I'll just read this quote. Never forget that walking away from something unhealthy is brave, even if you stumble a little out the door. So growing up as a young child, I experienced a lot of violence in my home. There was times where we were getting guns pulled out on us and, it became a norm. So as I would come home from school, I always see my mom and her husband fighting. And I just didn't understand. It was just really abnormal. I mean, there was times where we were getting ran off the road in cars. I remember so vividly, one time we came home from school and my mom was being hit with a hammer and she told all of me and my siblings to just go out of the house and just walk and she'll find us if she made it out. And so there was moments where, I never knew if my mom was gonna make it out alive. But the pivotal moment was, I remember it was a year before I graduated high school, and he had pulled a gun on my mom, and she was just like screaming and telling him, to just take me. And I was just like, no, like this cannot happen. And so I remember taking my younger siblings and I tried to get back in the house. And he had came to the door and he said, if you call the police, like someone's dying today. And so I remember just taking my siblings back and I never called the police out of the fear. And so, I mean, even till this day, I still battle with like, did I save, a harmful man or did I save my mom? And so it was just those moments of like children having to make those decisions to like protect themselves and like to wanting to like make sure that their family members are safe. And so I remember that night when he left, I went to my mom's room and I was crying. I said, why is this happening to us? And she looked at me and she was just like, I don't know. I think she was like stumbled by the fact that I asked her that question. So the next day when we got out of school, he wasn't there, and it was really shocking. And so my mom said, pack one bag, everything else is replaceable, but our lives aren't. So I remember just like grabbing a few things and we went to the shelter. And that day I was just so happy that my mom had got the courage for me and my younger siblings. And at that time, any young male that's over the age of 12 can't actually go into a domestic violence shelter. So my older brother actually we had to send him to a family member. So separating him, I knew was like a traumatizing thing for us. So we got to the shelter, we stayed, all five of us actually stayed in one room. And, my mom slept on the floor because there wasn't enough beds. So we stayed there for about a year and a half. And so my mom wasn't mentally like there because of all of the trauma she was experiencing. So I started to seek out my own mentors. Thankfully, like being able to be like a young person who knew that it was critical to like have other adults be there for me as I was going through my healing and for my siblings and I. So fast forward, violence re-entered my own relationship when I became an adult. And it got to the point where I remember having to take my two children and we escaped similar situations that I dealt with in my childhood had arose in my adulthood. And I kept thinking like, why is this happening? And so a lot of it was because I thought violence was love. That's what I seen growing up. And so until like I had that click in my head, I wasn't able to make those connections. And so I remember taking my kids to daycare one day, and I just decided to walk the lake. And it was a really like cloudy day. And I was just praying to God, and I was just trying to think like, how can I stop this for other young women? And so this word icon came in my head. And as I thought about the word icon, I was like, what does this mean? And that's when I can overcome negativity came in my head. I was like, my mom overcame negativity. I'm now in her shoes overcoming negativity. There's so many other women overcoming negativity. And that's where icon came into my head. And it was a beautiful moment. And so what I did was I started, let me see if I can change. I started thinking about ways to help break the cycle. So I started creating these fuzzy totes for women. And I donated them to Cornerstone Shelter, where I stayed as an adult. And the women started using these fuzzy totes as like pillowcases, but also just escape totes for themselves. So that was great. And I was just like, okay, how else can I help them? How can I really talk about violence is not love in a like public facing way to like embed that within people's minds? So this is some of the totes that I created. So some other ways that I did it was creating this icon box with other survivors of violence. So each of them actually contributed to this box. And inside the box, there was a bracelet that says, "Today I'm all right." There was a lavender soothing pouch just to help calm. And I still use it. I hold it like if I'm going somewhere, or, if I have like an anxiety moment, I still use that. There's a little heart in there that says deep breath. And then I have a mirror that just symbolizes beauty. So again, this personal altar box was really created for women and young girls to use as a safety net. And a lot of what I thought about too with this box was that moment where, even in my childhood, where my mom was like, grab a couple things, this was something that women could just grab and keep as like a symbolization of hope. So down the road, I started, as I talked about, thinking of other ways to contribute. As it's just me, I don't have the capacity to do programming all the time. So I wanted to create t-shirts, which I did. And now I'm on my third round. I sold out, which was great. I got to do pop-up shops around my neighborhood and talking with people about it. So I created these t-shirts called "Violence is Not Love." And then on the back, it says, "Don't be afraid to speak up," and was able to support organizations like Maria's Voice, The Link, and Cornerstone. Here are some of the pictures of the pop-up shops that I did in Edina, Eden Prairie, and Woodbury. Along with just raising awareness through fashion, I thought, it's really important to educate around what domestic violence is, because a lot of times, when things happen in our home, we feel like it just shouldn't be talked about. And so I wanted to educate that like the community, need to amplify these conversations. And so I started doing that through workshops and my podcast. And then here's just a photo of my podcast on YouTube called "I Am an Icon." And what I do is I just interview different people who've experienced it in their childhood or are practitioners helping women overcome the violence. I also do, excuse me, I also do police ride-alongs in Edina just to understand more of the process of how they take care of the victims. And so I started that late last year, which has been a great experience of like, one, holding the officers accountable of like, how are you talking to these women or men who are experiencing it? And I wanted to learn like more about the process and also influence it in a way. And then we also brought totes along too with the women, for the women. So I just wanted to share just kind of like my plan to grow is, of course, to continue to like, to build out the brand, but to provide more workshops, but then also do more product development. And eventually my goal would to be create a mobile app. And part of that, I'm currently working with the U of M, and the students are creating an Icon Ambassador program within a university system to really want to raise awareness about violence, because we know that it starts at an early age. And so it's critical that like that age range of 18 to 24 are understanding that like the violent behaviors are not okay, but then also how to be advocates for each other. And so currently working with them to figure out what this icon model could look like in a university setting to stop a lot of those violent behaviors, but also give space to young girls who have childhood trauma that they need to work through. And so this quote, "The silence of good people is more dangerous than the brutality of the bad people." I think, you know, this quote to me, I just carry with me because a lot of times, you know, during even my personal experience as an adult, there are people who were just silent. They knew what was going on and like I needed them to be a little more vocal, which, you know, I don't ever like get upset with them about, but I think if we can be more vocal and stand up in any capacity that we can when we know someone is experiencing something, I think it goes a long way. And then I just put my website, youareanicon.com. And that's all. Thank you all. And I'll take questions.
Thank you, Bianca. That's a very impactful talk. Are there any questions for Bianca? If not, I'd like to ask one.
Yeah.
Your icon, ICON, I can overcome negativity. What's the difference between negativity and violence? I guess
Yeah.
I'm trying to understand exactly what negativity means in your sentence.
Yeah, so, and that's a great question because as I think more of icon, it's not, you know, domestic violence is a platform that I started on, but overcoming negativity could be through anything. It could be, I mean, through racial issues, identity issues. And so, you know, my goal is to create icon as a bigger platform for young people. I just wanted to use, you know, my story as a platform to start and like tell people they can overcome it. Like, look at me, I've done it. And as I grow our icon, negativity honestly could be anything that's stopping you from growing and being the best person that you can be. And so that's how I look at negativity.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll take advantage of this moment to ask you another one. Have you found the police department in Edina easy to work with and welcoming as you ride along?
Well, so the first ride along, I actually requested the only Black officer there. And he's actually the only officer of color. And so I rode along with him and that was great. But then as I was like, you know, I can't keep this mentality if I want to, you know, provide racial equity within this system. So I started to get different connections and ride along with other officers, which has been like a great experience. So I have found it easy and rewarding, and they're really open to like having people ride along, but they're also open to figuring out ways to better their system. I think everybody, unfortunately, every police department is in this position where they have to stand up and figure out a way that works for everyone.
And have you been a part of police interaction with women who have experienced abuse or violence?
Yes. So when I was, so actually during the time in the shelter, I got connected with this program called Step Up. I started working for the city of Minneapolis. And so I was originally supposed to be doing some community planning and economic development, but I was so eager to figure out ways to deter violence. And so I created this 32-page document when I was 18, sent it to former Mayor R.T. Ryback and all the council members and the chief of police at the time. And from that effort, I actually got nominated as the first young person to sit on the Youth Violence Prevention Executive Committee for the city of Minneapolis. So I sat on there for 4 years. So I had a lot of experience from domestic violence to gang, prevention, and it was great, but I needed more. And so after the 4 years that I served, I was done. But yeah, I had a lot of experience.
It's very impressive. Thank you.
He has a question.
I was curious if you can comment possibly on areas in which the response system, you mentioned racial equity. So where are the key failures in terms of serving survivors of color? And then I'm also curious about any thoughts you have about the lack of a presumed lack of follow-up and accountability for perpetrators, especially those who aren't prosecuted. So I'm thinking of the presumed male perpetrators of violence against women who aren't arrested, who may be arrested but aren't charged or prosecuted. I'm just kind of looking at, so it's basically a question about highlights of where the system failures are.
Yeah, that's a great question. So where the system failures are for me is when you're dealing with women of color, there's an economic disparity. So a lot of times, even for my personal situation, like I didn't leave because I didn't have the funds to leave. So it took me to find, like, unfortunately, there was a really violent situation that I just had to get out of. And then, like, if I didn't have a network around me, I wouldn't have had the funds. I would have stayed in it. And a lot of women do, unfortunately. And so if they had $200-300, to like be able to like at least get them through a week and figure out a plan, that would go a long way. The women that I've helped, even just like any Edina that I've, experienced helping with, as we called shelters, literally when we called, like, I know it took me like a month to even get one woman into a shelter because there's no space. So when you think about space, and she's been sleeping in her car for over 2 months. And so the Edina police, honestly, like they brought a bunch of diapers for her son and stuff like that, and got her warm coats because there was literally no shelter. And I couldn't, unfortunately, like bring her into my apartment. So like I had to keep figuring out, are you warm? Are you safe? Like, during the day, where are you going to get warm? And yeah, there was literally no shelter. And so there's, an economic disparity. We have a lack of housing for women. And then there's just circumstances where women don't or can't leave if there's like children, like little kids. And so we have to consider that like every single situation is like completely different. And so like, I think just talking and having those resources where women can understand, like if you eventually get to the point where you can leave, here's what's available. And if they even want to leave, because some women don't, unfortunately. So it's just a lot of talking and trying to show them their value. And then as you talk about even just the perpetrator, I've learned with this work, like everyone is truly a victim, unfortunately, of the cycle of violence. Because the perpetrators experience so much trauma as well. And so, I'm thinking of ways currently of like how to figure out what systems should be better in place for those perpetrators as well. And I work closely with this organization called Maria's Voice, who actually was started, unfortunately, due to the death of Maria. She was murdered by her husband in Maple Grove. She was 28 years old, and her parents didn't even know that this was happening because there was a lot of emotional stuff. So when Maria did decide to leave, she unfortunately, was murdered and buried inside the home. But then, they finally found her. But I bring this story up because, like, if we don't continue to like push the message out there, people don't have that empowerment to talk about it, because it was unfortunate that her parents never knew this was happening. And unfortunately, her life was at the cost of it. And so, figuring out like how to have systems for the perpetrators, what programs are there for them. And then also like making sure that we're still taking care of the victims of violence. Because what more I'm seeing is like, it's not just women, like there are men who unfortunately don't speak up because of the masculinity piece. Because I've known a couple men I've had to help just recently who've been, experiencing violence, and trying to fight the systems and trying to get, like, if the woman gets to the police first, they're getting the domestic on their backgrounds for 7 years because we just don't think men can be abused. So changing all these perceptions are super important. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Myra says, thank you for this presentation. I'm so glad that your mother rescued you and your family from a traumatic situation, preventing further abuse. I'm wondering what you might have to say about early childhood education on preventing violence.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it goes back to the resources that we're having available, because, if we can prevent a child experiencing violence at home, to me, that's a win. So I think it just goes back to, like, what resources are available for that child at the school, in the spaces. And I think we just need to just keep embedding these messages. Like, we unfortunately can't, like, if you're an educator, my mom is, she could never control, like, what goes on in someone's home. But I think, if she's able to provide a resource or support an organization like ICON that could, like, push the message out there, people will start to see that, it's important to make sure our kids have safe homes. So, education right now, as we all know, is a really tough field, but we just have to keep pushing the message is the biggest thing I see right now.
And another question, are there plans to work with other local police departments other than Edina? And I gather Woodbury also does some work in this area. But we realize that your funds or assets are limited, but wondered if there's anything going on there.
Yeah, there are plans. So I think as I talk about the next phase, is my struggle right now is figuring out the best infrastructure for ICON. Because going back, like, we're not a programmer, we're the bridger. So, like, there are programs out here that just are very underfunded. And so the reason why I chose to use my fashion, the t-shirts, the totes, was to support those organizations through giving them the 50% profit. Because they're really unfortunately under-resourced. So figuring out a way to continue to be, like, that voice for them and then support them through the products that I have is, like, really my bridge.
Is a large part of your activity at this point doing public speaking like this and outreach?
Yeah, it is. So my day job, I work for the Minnesota Timberwolves and Lynx. So a lot of what I do is social. In my role, I do a lot of, like, the social community work. And so I'm always talking about ways to, like, better people's social brands. But I think, it always goes back. Like, I always talk about, like, who I am first and foremost, because I bring my heart into everything. But yeah, on a daily basis, I'm constantly, like, speaking to people. Just did a workshop at the Link with young girls, and we design crowns and talking about ways to empower themselves. And so the Link works a lot with young women who've been sex trafficked. And so I brought the ICON platform to them, and we just, talked about ways for them to overcome negativity and be empowered. So, there's different outlets that I can have, but yeah, definitely love to public speak.
Is part of the problem of underreporting that mothers are afraid children will be taken away from them?
Big time. That was one of my fears. I remember when I was first telling a couple of friends and family members about my situation, I had got a call from Child Protection, and I was so scared. And I think that was also one of, like, the defining moments, was, like, my kids literally. And then I thought about it too. I was like, I am putting them in this situation. Like, unfortunately, we are at the risk of someone else's behavior. But, like, if I don't get out the situation, then it's going to continue to harm them. And so, like, I didn't want to be my mom, where it took us, the kids getting to 18 to, like preteens and stuff, to finally leave. And I was like, I remember the day I did leave, like my kids, like I literally didn't have the chance to put them in clothes. They were in diapers and we just ran out the house and got to safety. But yeah, the biggest fear. And when I got that call, like I just could not imagine my kids being taken away from me. Yeah.
We have a question on the repercussions of pornography. And does this have an effect on either trafficking or violence? Is there a connection between pornography and the violence you see?
I'm not very versed in that, so I'm not sure, but I'm sure there are some connections in some way, especially with like sex trafficking and being in inner cities. That's where it happens a lot. And so, I'm sure there are connections, but I'm not very versed in that, so I'm not sure.
The question around children's mental health, I just wanted to return to that and just get your perspective. I know there's an effort to increase resources for providers, especially for school-based children's mental health. The conversations of which I'm aware don't really reflect or incorporate domestic violence. And so this is, children may be experiencing severe and persistent mental illness, bipolar disorder, some of these other conditions, but not response to childhood trauma or trauma in their home. I'm kind of curious if you have any thoughts about whether those providers in the location in the schools connect with impacted families or families, the children experiencing domestic violence in their home. It's basically like, they're putting all this money, I should say, in theory, state and local government are trying to put more money into the system. But if it's not accessing this particular corner, it leaves me concerned. And I'm just kind of curious as to whether you have any perspective on any of that.
Yeah, the mental health and like our practitioners as such, like I think there's like a huge disparity, one between like the lack of people who look like us that are taking care of us. And so even just within like people of color who are experiencing violence, like I remember bringing my son into the hospital one time and like this, and I'm sure like her intentions were to protect my child, but she made me feel so uncomfortable in a way she thought I was like harming my child. And so like there's just, I think, just a huge disparity just within our health system and taking care of people of color. And I think it's just a struggle of like, people don't have trust anymore in our system. So there may be dollars going to it, but people are not utilizing them in an effective way because I think there's a big lack of trust in our community. And with just even mental health in general, you can tell like a child is experiencing something at home by the way they act sometimes in school. And I remember before I actually left my situation, my son was, showing up to school so tired. He wasn't getting what he needed. He was crabby. And like when I left my situation, I could see the instant change. Like he wasn't hearing the arguments at home. He wasn't seeing the violence. And so it makes a big impact. And we unfortunately don't look at those different things that children are trying to show us and tell us because they can't articulate it in a way. And so if there are people, we need more people who have that cultural awareness of like, one, being able to connect with the child on their level, but to see those different signs that are actually impacting our children as they get to school. Because it shouldn't be on the teachers to have to, this is why the teachers are like striking right now. They're upset. Like there's so much they can't do for the child holistically. And so that's why it's important that conversations around domestic violence show up, because it's not just a physical thing. A child hearing constant yelling, that's just a trauma thing. A child seeing their mom, like, if I'm experiencing violence, like I remember I couldn't even give my child the love that they need because I'm so in this like mental mind frame of like, how do I get better? I'm trying to just figure out how I get better. And so kids are neglected all the time, I feel. They just unfortunately can't get the love that they need when they're dealing with things at home. And I'm a big believer that the home is where the heart and everything, the foundation is that is where it starts for our kids. And if they don't have great homes, then they're not gonna, honestly, I feel like they're not gonna be able to take on the world in a great way. So home, we have to be better about providing resources for families to provide safe homes for children.
Will training for teachers, which I gather is part of the um, mental health funds going to schools,
Mhm.
will that help, do you think? Um, I believe if a teacher sees signs of abuse, they have to report. Um, Is that a good thing? Uh, Will that get help to the child who needs it?
Yeah, I think there's just it goes back to like, how are we bringing in the parent too? Because like we have to have more parent engagement as well. So, I mean, teachers are mandated reporters and that's fine. I think it just goes back to like this cultural piece because the child protection system, foster care systems, that's not really doing much. That's also a problem. And so if our goal, I always tell people like domestic violence is not to end, like take people away from their homes. It's to build safe, like the awareness piece is to build safe homes for everyone. And so figuring out how to break all of these generational curses, like we have to like bring everyone that's a part of the whole cycle together. Because if you keep trying to break up these families, like to me, like that's where like a big piece in the cultural like awareness is like creating a lot of tension. So I mean, we have to make sure like everyone is bringing brought to the table. And I think we should give parents the respect to like, hey, I'm noticing this about your child and I'm concerned. Is there anything we can help you versus taking it straight to a system that's still going to fail the child?
I don't know whether I dare ask a personal question, but you said that your brother was separated from the family because he couldn't be in the shelter.
Mhm.
Did he survive that trauma? Did he heal from that experience? Was it okay for him?
I don't think it was. I mean, he's still right now. He's dealing with a lot of depression, and he's suicide thoughts. And I mean, I'm trying to support him the best way I can. But I mean, I think we each individually, as 5 of us, have a different impact on it. And I was blessed to be able to take my pain and turn it into something positive. But as I see some of my siblings are dealing with it in a way that is unhealthy, unfortunately, and even one of my sisters. I know you asked about my brother, but I think about all my siblings. But even one of my sisters, still dealt with, domestic violence, and I'm trying to talk to her through those things. And, but yeah, I mean, my brother is still, I mean, he's dealing with a lot of depression and trauma. Mhm. I think too, part of his experiences just as like a young Black man of like, who can I trust? It goes back to like, where are the practitioners that I can trust that are going to take care of me? A lot of the mental health, like even therapists he has, like he couldn't find someone of color to talk to him. So I think there's like a whole system that's like failing him on this. And like it's not that he doesn't want to get help, but the help is not effective.
So do we also need some funding or incentive to get training for more psychologists, psychiatrists of color into the system?
Yeah, I mean, we can get them in the system. We just have to figure out how to take care of them when they're in the system. So I think, even seeing like with the police department, like they can recruit all day for people of color, but if you have them in a system that doesn't take care of them, then they're not gonna want to work for the system anymore. So it's like we get them in the system, and then what do we need to do to keep them there? Because I think we do need a lot more practitioners of color.
Let me check one more time for questions.
Okay.
I am wondering about your pop-up shops, where you sell your products and how and where would one find them? Are there permanent locations or can they contact you through your website?
Yes, so I haven't been doing pop-up shops in the winter time, but I'll start them back up in the summer once it gets warmer. I don't have a permanent location right now, but you could find the products on my website, youareanicon.com.
Wonderful. They are beautiful products.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, well, I want to thank you so very much for speaking with us. And you've certainly given us some insights into an area where I certainly have been very ignorant and very grateful to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to let you know that next Sunday, we have the beneficiaries of the Easter offering. Our partner organizations in town, they will be this year Habitat for Humanity, Twin Cities, the Simpson Housing Services, and Align Minneapolis, formerly the Downtown Congregations to End Homelessness. And I hope you'll join us. We'll learn a lot about these three organizations next week. And again, thank you, Bianca, and thank you all for being with us.
Thank you. I think I closed it out.